The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is Clayton Ryness here. We're going to give people a few minutes to join, and we'll get started here momentarily. We'll give folks one more minute here, and we'll dive in. All right, we'll go ahead and begin here. Thank you for joining the webinar. This is a joint webinar between Tevora and Recorded Future. We're going to be talking about detecting ransomware attacks pre-encryption. Obviously, you want to get this stuff early. We do see a lot of incidences come through. We thought proper to put together some material to help you get a sense for what's possible, what tooling you may need, and what processes you may have want to put in place to be able to get on top of potential ransomware issues. So we'll go through a little brief intro here. My name is Clayton Ryness, and I'm Principal Consultant here at Tevora, and I really oversee our technical delivery practice areas. That's all of the threat incident response work that we do, penetration testing, all the cloud security. So when the phone rings, oftentimes our teams are the ones picking it up. So we do see a lot of incidences that come across. A lot of that we're going to weave into here, some of the messaging on what we actually see happening in practice. So this is not just theory, this is stuff that we're seeing in the field. These are actual impacts that we do have that are relevant and interesting. And from a partnership standpoint, Tevora, we partner really with everybody, but keep most folks at arm's length. Notable exceptions being ones that we like to do webinars with, that we really believe in their tool set, their processes, their teams. Great to be joined today by Lindsay Kay, who's Senior Director, Operational Outcomes of INSIC Group, and working with Recorded Future here. We've been doing this for years and see a lot of their good stuff. And we're very happy to do this. So I'm just going to tee up a little bit of Tevora and just our perspective on things to help give Lindsay enough runway to really go through some of the things that she's been doing and her group's been doing. And you know, she has quite a background in doing malware analysis and reverse engineering, so you'll see that come through in some of the items she'll be speaking through as well. But just broadly speaking, Tevora has been management cybersecurity consulting since 2003. A lot of employees, lots of clients, all sizes, all complexities, whether you're SLED, whether you're professional services or your business flips burgers. We've had you in our portfolio and been working with clients really of all sizes. Certified 10 ways from Sunday. If there's a 3 or 4 letter acronym that you can gap against, certify against, it's in our wheelhouse, and that's really what we like to do. A couple of things to keep in mind here. This is really what we're seeing. So the majority of the incident response hotline calls that we do get at Tevora do have a ransomware attack element. Either it's suspected or it's actually happened. And a lot of folks have gotten to a point where they have their endpoint control in place. That was big, right? Last 5 or 6 years. Get your endpoints right so you can detect and prevent this. But there's always this left hanging on, well, what else should we be doing? and what other tooling may exist. Why are we just waiting and relying on simply the endpoint, which is the last part you should be worried about? It's important, but it's not the only part. So we do get a lot of questions asked about what else could we be doing to help detect and prevent these kinds of events. It is important to remember, right, these are opportunistic type attacks. It's not the old adage of, well, I don't have anything important, so I'm not gonna really be a target. Well, your systems are important, obviously, to you, and you want to be able to use them when you'd like to. Therefore, you could be a target. That's why these attacks are certainly opportunistic. And we're seeing that, really, all industries, all people, there's really no one that's immune to this risk. And the best outcomes that we see are ones that have early detection and response. It's absolutely essential, and you need to be able to have the right tools and processes in place to be able to do that. Do not wait for your endpoint. Don't rely on your backups, certainly if you haven't tested them. So having good threat intel, having a good technique early on to detect these and jump on them is really what we want to be focusing on today. I will turn this over to Lindsay, but if you could please keep your questions to the end. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. If you'd like to drop those in chat as well, that's certainly your prerogative, and we'll get through to those at the end. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clayton. So as Clayton said, today we're going to talk a little bit about how to detect ransomware attacks per encryption. So just kind of a high-level overview of some of the topics we'll talk about today. So first, the business of ransomware. Next, the different stages of the attack lifecycle. So what are kind of the main stages of a ransomware attack? And then how can we detect each stage, and what data sources are most useful to us in doing so? And then finally, how do we stay ahead of what's next? Because the threat is not largely about what it is today, but it's also about what it is tomorrow. So most simply, ransomware is a business, and it really does need to remain profitable for threat actors who are deploying it. So as a result, what we see is an underground economy that makes getting into ransomware and executing these successful attacks easier for aspiring threat actors. And they really don't need a large amount of technical expertise to do so. So some of kind of the main topic areas that we'll talk about today are first, how they gain initial access and sort of what tools are at their disposal and where do they get them. Next, we'll talk about which different types of data they're acquiring, where they get it, and kind of what it enables them to do. And then how they buy and sell tools and data, so largely on dark web marketplaces and shops. And then finally, what they use to enhance kind of the operation and infrastructure elements of the ransomware attack that they want to conduct. So the interesting part about it is that a lot of this is commoditized and automated. So what does this mean? So commoditization is simply that if you don't have what you need, odds are someone is selling it on the dark web, especially. So this could be something like access via credentials, access to RDP and VPN, and it's often sold by threat actors called initial access brokers who sell these initial accesses to other aspiring threat actors. Additionally, if you wish to deploy ransomware, you don't need to be able to write it on your own. So you can join an affiliate program and gain access to the ransomware and the developer who develops it. Next, you can also buy things like checkers, exploit stealers, and brute forcers for credentials. And then finally, without having to write your own command and control framework, you can gain access to ready-made and openly available ones. These are often extensible. So a couple that you may be familiar with include Empire, Covenant, POSH-C2, and Coatic. So automation is the idea that instead of having to manually conduct kind of the bad things that you wish to do, you can use automation to make it quicker and easier. So we see this appear in a couple different places. So first, spam and phishing tools. So the automated templates allow a threat actor to send out a large amount of spam pretty easily to many, many different victims, which makes it easier. Gaining access to loaders and install shops. So if they wish to deploy malware to existing botnets, they can do so without having to kind of spin up their own. Also automated marketplaces and shops. So a couple popular ones, Russian Market, 2easy Shop, and Genesis Store. And then we're all familiar with Cobalt Strike and how powerful of a tool it is, but aggressive scripts really allow red teams and threat actors to automate a lot of the functionality of it, including things like running commands and delivering a payload. So we're going to look at how a lot of this kind of appears in a ransomware attack, but first what we need to do is discuss kind of what the basic anatomy of a ransomware attack is. So for simplicity's sake, I've kind of defined sort of four main areas here. So first, initial access, very simply how the threat actor first gets access to the organization or a target system. Next, after they've gained access, they're going to want to escalate their attack, which could include things like lateral movement, reconnaissance, establishing persistence. So this is largely represented by kind of that second box there. Then many ransomware threat actors really want to exfiltrate victim data. So they use this largely for extortion to really kind of get the victim to pay. And then finally, the dropping of the ransomware. So here's a couple of different examples of different tools and TTPs that might be used at each stage. So obviously not every single ransomware attack uses every one of these tools, and I have not listed every single tool that can be used here. But this should start to give you kind of some of an idea of which tools are really kind of helpful in each stage. And you may even be familiar with some of them for their benign use cases. But as Clayton said, and what I want to underscore here is that really detecting the ransomware attack before the ransomware has been dropped is sort of your best bet, because then you kind of have a lot of advantages, and there we'll discuss several different data sources and detection opportunities that'll allow us to do so. So first, really wanting to define initial access. So the attack does need to kind of start somewhere. So this is really how the threat actor will first gain entry into the target system, and they use a variety of techniques known as initial access vectors. Additionally, they can also collect credentials, so things like usernames, passwords, private key files, or other sort of authentication material that can be used to first gain that initial access or increase the access that they already have to a target network. So let's look at how they harvest credentials. So we're all familiar with phishing. They could do it via things like fake login pages or man-in-the-middle proxies. Threat actors can also deploy types of malware called credential stealers, which, as you expect, steal credentials from the victim system. So some of the popular ones that you may have heard of are Redline, Raccoon Stealer, Vicker Stealer, and Azure Ult. In the case that a threat actor does not want to deploy the credential stealer him or herself, they can actually buy these exfiltrated logs for credential stealers on the dark web. So Genesis Store, Russian Market, and Tuesday are places that they could potentially buy them. Additionally, sometimes when threat actors have access to, let's say, a network or a victim system, they can sometimes find some of the unsecured credentials on the system. So think of things like people accidentally typing their password into the bash shell, and then you can see it in the bash history. Private key files laying around, if system administrators kind of have notes with any sort of login information, or developers who make internal tools that have hard-coded credentials in their scripts that they didn't expect other people to be able to see. These are a couple of different places that threat actors might find victim credentials. And then finally, input capture. So most simply, things like keyloggers, any sort of GUI capture, or web input capture. So initial access can be gained in a variety of different ways, but primarily what this is phishing, which we're familiar with, exploitation of vulnerabilities, or brute forcing some different remote services. So things like RDP, SSH, and VNC are some popular ones, but you can actually purchase some of these accesses from IAVs on the dark web. So threat actors don't have to necessarily gain the initial access, but initial access brokers are selling it. So I'm not going to read all of these to you, but they should serve to give you some idea of the sheer diversity of different types of accesses that are sold. So things to like VPN appliances, so Pulse, Juniper, and Fortinet are some popular ones, domain access, so including administrator access, and then to legitimate system administrator software as well. So this is obviously not all the different types of accesses that one can buy, but it should give you some idea of the variety of different accesses that threat actors can purchase on the dark web if they wish to. So now we're going to look at some of the relevant data sources that'll help us either threat hunt or start detecting initial access. So first, one of the things that you're going to want to understand are who are the threat actors of concern. And then after kind of understanding kind of who the threat actors that present kind of the most threat or whatever to your organization, you want to understand what kinds of accesses are they and initial access brokers selling. So what is out there and what is available. And then also understanding how do they typically target organizations like yours to kind of start to narrow down the scope of this problem. Next, looking for vulnerabilities. There are many vulnerabilities out there, so trying to understand which ones are popularly exploited, so kind of which ones to start prioritizing there, and then do any of them have proofs of concept published for them? So this does not say that if a vulnerability does not have a proof of concept out there, it will not be exploited, but if you're looking to kind of threat hunt or test any sort of your detections and defenses, proofs of concept serve as a pretty helpful way of understanding how this vulnerability can be exploited and how threat actors may potentially do so. Additionally, these two things are not only relevant for the things in your organization within your security perimeter, but also looking for different products in your supply chain and suppliers that you use. And then finally, phishing remains popular. So looking for new domain registrations, especially type of squats of your organization's domains is key. So now that we understand sort of the main data sources that are relevant here, what we want to do is figure out how to detect it. So I've used a couple of examples using Record Feature, as I'm most familiar with that. So trying to identify potential phishing domains and any activity on them. So a couple suggestions here. Looking for type of squats for your organization. Looking also if you use several different kinds of commonly mimicked services, things like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Rackspace, and Akamai are popular, something to look for as well. Any sort of fake login pages, especially those that are currently active. Additionally, looking for phishing attacks using Excel, PowerPoint, or Word. These are very popular kind of phishing documents that'll often be sent via email and contain, malicious embedded macros often. Then, looking for any of those proofs of concept that we talked about for any commonly exploited vulnerabilities to start to understand how things in your sort of organization and your supply chain could be exploited and attacked. So next, what we want to do is figure out now, after the threat actor has gained the initial access, what are the different things that they'll do to look for other systems to either infect or collect data from, based on kind of what their interest in kind of goal of the attack is. They may do things like disable security products or otherwise prepare the system and the network for the final stage of the attack. So there's a variety of tools that are used at this stage. This is just kind of a sampling of them. So Cobalt Strike, eternally popular both with APT and ransomware groups. Oftentimes they'll use things that are built-in Windows tools. So this is known as living off the land. So a lot of these are familiarly or benignly used by kind of system administrators and sort of like normal users in kind of everyday existence. So a couple examples here: MSHTA, BITS, CSC, just kind of give you some examples there. We're all familiar with PowerShell for its kind of benign use as a scripting language, but we definitely see it provide extensive functionality both for tools at this stage, as well as tools, sometimes even entire sort of final payloads written in PowerShell. Next, again, gaining and using credentials for existing services is relevant here because you can totally understand how once you kind of gain access to one system, being able to take advantage of SSH, RDP, or other kinds of S&P, different things like that to spread throughout the network is something a threat actor might want to do. Then, again, third-party system administrator software often has substantial privileges and functionality to allow them to drop tools and other systems there. Banking Trojans, so a couple examples here that can be used to collect data, drop additional malware, etc. QuakeBot, ICID, and TrickBot, which I'm sure you all heard of. Again, also managed service providers, a couple examples there. And then finally, openly available red team tools. So things like SharpHound and ADFine for Active Directory enumeration, Communicats for credentials, and then Rubius for abuse of Kerberos are a couple examples. So Cobalt Strike is definitely a big one. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how to detect Cobalt Strike. So it's really popular. So in 2020, it was used in the majority of ransomware attacks. Generally, what threat actors will use it for is something like lateral movement, reconnaissance, data exfiltration, or credential stealing. And we all kind of know that it's super challenging to detect. So really, if you're kind of approaching how do we detect Cobalt Strike, you need sort of a full spectrum of detection methodologies. Recorded Future actually put out a report, I believe it was last year, on detecting Cobalt Strike. So if you have a chance to check that out, it's definitely worth it. So in the report, we talked about a couple different types of detections. So host-based detections and network detections. While these could be definitely changed by a threat actor, here's just kind of a couple of sort of starting points to start looking into to detect Cobalt Strike. So first, the static phishing macro variable names used for the initial access vector. Sigma rules. So if you're able to deploy Sigma rules, you can use them for the suspicious child processes of Microsoft Office documents, the initial execution, scheduled task creation, any of the distinctively named pipes used for the lateral movement that the tool does. And if you see run DLL 32 without any arguments, which is known as a sacrificial process, which is not kind of usually how run DLL is used. So next, also looking for Windows Security Log Event ID, if you have Windows Security Log available to you, 4624. So this would be an abnormal logon event. And one of the things that we did as part of this research was we put out several different YAR rules to help detect Cobalt Strike and any of the related malware, so you can check those out as well. Moving into the network detection side, so there's a couple sort of default network signals that you can look for in a tool like Showdown. So we have things like the default SSL certificate, the default port Cobalt Strike is often run with, and the DRAM signature there that you can see. But also looking for beacon traffic detections focused on like malleable C2 profiles that are used. And one of the things the record feature actually puts out is the command and control feed for Cobalt Strike. So we analyzed Cobalt Strike, looked for the network signature, and then we're able to write signatures to detect Cobalt Strike C2 traffic, and that's available to our customers as a data feed. So now moving into some of those LOL bins, so the living off the land tools. So these are slightly challenging to detect, obviously, but here's where we want to kind of start with finished intelligence. So really this will help us understand what exactly are threat actors doing, so kind of what is the goal that they're using these tools for, and then really get that sense of how they are exactly doing it. So how are they using the tools, what kinds of commands, kind of what is the current state of the threat actors' use of these tools. So here's where it kind of gets a little complicated though. So while endpoint focused hunting strategies are super important for this, you also need to be able to start looking at what is sort of a normal use of this tool versus an anomalous one. And there are some definite complications here, but some examples include using MSHTA or certutil and seeing them access a suspicious URL. Something like a Word document running PowerShell commands and making a network connection, not generally how we expected that to be, or the creation of unexpected scheduled tasks. But it's really not enough to kind of just look for these sort of behavioral anomalies, but really kind of combining them with other suspicious indicators, maybe that you get through your threat intelligence platform. So these can include malicious or suspicious hashes for known malware or malicious tools, something like any network indicators, so suspicious domains and IPs, and looking at the parent-child process relationships, because that also might suggest malicious use versus benign use. So relevant data sources here, there's kind of a large variety of data sources here as well, but kind of the key types are OSINT and dark web intelligence, using endpoint data, and passive or active network scanning. So here's where it's really helpful to have sort of different techniques to kind of track these different TTPs. So being able to look at both the network and endpoint footprint is key. So sometimes tools will have a very distinctive network footprint or artifacts and not as much of an endpoint one, and vice versa. So being able to track both here is very helpful. Additionally, looking at the fact that these tools will evolve. So some of these aspects will change over time, the artifacts they leave behind, and some will not. So having several different types of visibility into the threat is helpful, especially if something does evolve and you need to kind of update some of your signatures and detections there. And obviously some techniques are better suited to tracking these tools in different ways. And this is largely based on kind of what security appliances and sort of utilities are at your disposal. So this is something where several different types of data and making the decision of which is kind of the most appropriate for your needs is where you might have to kind of do some work. So now that we know what threat actors are doing, how they're doing it, and sort of the relevant data sources here, really sort of applying some of this to our mitigations is where we go next. So things you could do, blocking IPs and URLs from the command and control server feeds. So these are known C2s, blocking on them is advised. If possible, deploying Sigma, Yara, and Snort rules for specific threats that you identify to your organization. Again, we want to be able to monitor for newly registered suspicious domains. So this applies here too, because a lot of these tools will beacon out. And then really start understanding not only when the registration happens, but when we start to see sort of maliciousness, bad behavior, threat actors using them, registration of SSL certificates, things like that might suggest that these domains are now being used. Additionally, consider using something like Windows Defender Application Control to block any of these sort of native applications that may be abused, if that fits with your organization's kind of defensive strategy and what constitutes normalcy and functionality for you. But most importantly, none of this is kind of, a one and done, set in stone type of operation here. So it's something that you need to keep iterating on. So as these tools evolve, as new threat actors spin up and down, they may use them in different ways. Keeping abreast of that and then iterating on your detections, any threat hunting you're doing is key here. So next, kind of moving into sort of that data exfiltration in C2. So not every threat actor will do this, but generally you'll see it as part of a ransomware attack or for purpose of espionage. Threat actors may want to exfiltrate any of the data they've collected in the previous stages of the attack. And they'll do it to a command and control server. Sometimes we also see threat actors wanting to task the malware, so give it commands and then, I guess, receive any sort of the exfiltrated data from those commands. So a couple different ways that we see threat actors sort of doing both of these things. So command and control, you'll see use of common protocols helps the traffic blend in a little bit more. A couple examples there, FTP TNS and HTTP, HTTPS. Oftentimes for some of the state-sponsored tools, you'll see something like a custom protocol. So this will be generally pretty specific to either one type of tool or a group of tools, but it is a fairly custom kind of interesting protocol that they'll use. Sometimes you'll see people use things like legitimate remote access software, so TeamViewer or LogMeIn are examples. But you also sometimes see things like dead drop resolvers and common services. So sometimes you'll see their data or additional payloads hosted on something like Discord or Dropbox, which may easily blend into kind of the normal use of traffic on your network. For data exfiltration, again, sometimes the custom protocol, very tool dependent. But a lot of the times what you'll see is, especially with ransomware threat actors, the use of benign tools. So I'm sure you're familiar with all the benign uses of these tools here, but something like rclone, 7-zip, mega-NZ, or WinSCP can be used to exfiltrate victim data from the network. So here, a couple relevant data sources, really largely sort of the endpoint and then passive and active network scanning area. Looking at network traffic sourced from a couple different places, so things like C2 scanning, things like malware sample beaconing, so the beacon and kind of data exfiltration commands from malware, and then any external detections for known C2 patterns. Looking at sort of the endpoint detections, this is really more focused on either specific malicious tools or malicious use of common tools. Again, this would be something like Yara and Sigma rules, possibly snort rules could be involved as well from the network perspective. So how do we approach detecting data exfiltration if we've kind of discussed sort of the hunting of commodity and system administrator tools here? So this is where kind of, again, that looking to detect unusual use of these tools comes in. Again, defining what is normal for your organization is key here, but some examples include something like rclone used with a mega.io upload domain, if that's unusual for your organization, or seeing very large WinSCP transfers to unusual IPs at unusual hours, or something that really is just kind of anomalous for what you'd expect, your everyday users to be doing. Looking here at what is normal for the organization is in a couple different areas, and I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's something that would start to kind of give you some of those indicators or hints. But looking at network traffic patterns, so the size of the data, when it generally kind of occurs, where it's going, kind of a couple of different examples there, and then expected tools that you expect users to be using. So if anything anomalous there might suggest something potentially malicious would be happening. So now we're finally in that malware deployment stage, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the data sources and sort of the detections that are available here. If kind of you get to this case where you're looking to detect the malicious behavior. So here, it's really largely focused on a lot of the endpoint data that you have. So again, here it's very driven by the actor-specific tooling. So if you can think of, for example, some very specific ransomware variants that you hear about, so things like Alpha, Black Matter, Revil was very popular for a while. So this is where kind of those very threat actor-specific tools start to come into play. And here you see a tighter relationship between IOCs, especially if you want to do threat hunting. And what I mean by that is you'll see this specific hash beacons to this specific IP or accesses this particular domain. You'll see it drop this particular second stage file or create a specific mutex or different things like that. So really kind of that tight coupling. So if you're looking to threat hunt, that might be helpful there, something like that. Here also, you'll start to see kind of the way that you want to sort of detect or threat hunt a particular threat actor is very different based on whether or not it's sort of ransomware or espionage, because it's really determined by kind of the goal of the tool. So that very much influences behavior. So ransomware, right, you want to kind of get in, cause as much destruction as possible, as quickly as possible, versus espionage tools generally are stealthier. They may not be as noisy. They may be, let's say, taking tasking from a C2. Different things like that will influence how you kind of pursue detection and threat hunting here. But really, this kind of goes to say that we need to focus on what's next. So a lot of these tools are very specific to the specific kind of tool set and the variant that is currently active. But we need to keep an eye out for things that are coming up. So threat actors generally evolve their tools pretty quickly. So we need to talk about how we do kind of stay ahead of that and then look to the future. So here's where threat intelligence really comes into play. So you're not just looking at, what is a problem today, but keeping a mind out for, are the threat actors evolving their tools, or where are they going next? What are the new tools that are coming out? So keeping an eye on things that, one of the things that we like to track or report a future is emerging tools and TTPs. So what kinds of, new tools are being posted to GitHub? What types of new C2 frameworks come out? Any sort of red team or pen testing tools, new research that comes out that a threat actor might be able to take advantage of. So keeping in mind that, we can see a lot of these tools and things that are released, but so can threat actors, right? So could there be something out there that they may not be maliciously using today, but may want to use tomorrow or incorporate into their tools? The end stage malware is going to evolve. So again, not just enough to hunt what is relevant today, but also tomorrow. So something you can also do is pivot off of any of the IOCs that you're observing for malicious behavior in your environment to start identifying new badness to either threat hunt or kind of surface to the top of your priority list here. And then again, iterating on and tuning your detections. So threat hunting and detecting malware and malicious behavior, especially kind of prior to dropping a ransomware, isn't really enough to kind of do just one and done. So really what we need to do is kind of look and say, great, here are my detections, and then iterate on them and tune them as you kind of learn more and the landscape evolves. And with that, I will happily take any questions. I will check the chat quickly. Okay, so I guess I will turn it over to Clayton, unless, go ahead.
No, I think we got a question here. What are some things that you can do to get started with detection? Are there ways to determine if you have a detection problem?
Sure. So obviously this really depends on kind of the size of your organization, what you sort of have available to you. But a lot of people talk a lot about the idea of logging, right? So if you have logging on, really start to understand, like, what is it detecting? Is it detecting exactly what you think it is doing? And then sort of looking at sort of what's available there is definitely kind of a good first step. So if something obviously were to happen, that also being able to look at a lot of these different types of logs that are at your disposal kind of gives you an idea of exactly what happened, if you were to have to kind of deal with an attack like that, if that helps.
Yeah, sounds good. Someone else is asking about a SIM, and does what you're proposing here complement the SIM? Would it replace it? Does it integrate with a particular SIM?
So I think this just kind of gives you sort of an overview of the different types of data sources and approaches that you can take. So SIMs often you can, for example, use with Sigma rules with the SIMs. So if that's relevant to you, sort of like looking at some of what we talked about today that would be relevant. So I'm very kind of, SIM agnostic here in a lot of this discussion, but this is more a little bit of kind of some of the approach you can take, if that helps.
That sounds good. There's a question here about automation and automation platforms. Is there integration hooks there in Recorded Future?
So outside of kind of specific automation platforms, we definitely have different types of feeds. So things like malicious hashes, a lot of those C2 feeds that I talked a little bit about, being able to use our API for a variety of different things. We could get back to you on like specifically what those can be used for, but being able to take a lot of our data feeds and then feed them into whatever tools that you have available to you, that could be an area for automation as well.
All right, sounds good. Well, sort of last call here for questions. I'll just sort of wrap up here. Lindsay, thank you for sharing your insight. Wonderful, always good to hear from the trenches on what's actually happening. And hopefully attendees, you've gained a little bit of knowledge and insight onto some of the practical ways we can get a handle on ransomware here. So thank you all for attending, really appreciate it. And on behalf of Tevora and Recorded Future, thank you for coming.